Hello, testing, testing. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the latest breakfast event. We're very happy and lucky to have Dr. Cathy Stone with us this morning from University of Newcastle.
Morning, everyone.
And she is in Adelaide to speak at HERTSA, I think.
Yes, tomorrow
and
at HERTSA.
We've got in first, so we're very lucky to. Sorry, we're very lucky to have Cathy with us today. It's extremely popular breakfast morning, as you can see. So before I hand over to Cathy, I'll just say we're going to let Cathy get started, and then we'll, while she's talking, if we could quietly get some breakfast. Normally it comes a little bit earlier, but so we'll try not to disturb Cathy too much. So, is there an acknowledgement slide there? Because I don't know it by heart. And before we get started, an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to acknowledge the meeting is being held on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and we pay our respects to elders both past and present. So thanks very much for coming, and thank you very much, Cathy, and over to you, Cathy.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to have a sip of water. I've got a bit of hay fever. I take that hay fever medication. It makes me so thirsty, so excuse me for a minute. Well, thank you so much, all of you, for coming out on this chilly morning, although it's a beautiful sunny day out there. And I'm really pleased to be here today and talking to other people who are not in the room but are participating in this session on a virtual basis. I'm just going to run through the slides, which will be pretty self-explanatory. But if you want to ask questions during the presentation, please do, and I'm sure there'll be time at the end of it to talk as well. So we might just get started, and do help yourselves to breakfast and coffee. It won't bother me at all. Now, I was promised this would move the slides on, but it's not. Sorry. Minor technological hitch. We know all about those, all of us, don't we? This is working now. Great. Okay, thank you. Just first of all, a little bit about me, just to give you a bit of an idea about my background and how I got into this particular research around student outcomes in online learning, because I want to stress that I am in no way an expert in teaching and learning in the online space. I understand students, at least I think I do to a certain extent, but it's people like yourselves that have informed this research and this report. So I'm a conjoint senior lecturer with the University of Newcastle. This year I'm a visiting research fellow with the National Centre for Student Equity. And look, I came into the higher education sector through a background in social work. I worked in health for many years. And then I came into the higher ed sector in '94 as a university counsellor. So that was really my background. Then I got very interested in the student experience, and particularly the mature age first in family experience, because I would see so many of those students in a counselling setting, and to me they were just so heroic. The challenges that they were facing, the difficulties in just enrolling, let alone actually persisting and staying, were enormous. And this was in an on-campus environment. Only later did I begin to realise how much harder it was in an online environment. So I then decided to do my doctoral thesis in that area of research. And I continued in higher education student support services as a practitioner, manager, director of services. And then I worked at Open Universities Australia for 4 years, and I finished up there at the end of 2014, which of course gave me I think a lifelong interest and passion for the opportunities that online learning can provide for the types of students that I was already very committed to. So this is how I applied for the Equity Fellowship with the National Centre, to specifically look at how can we make that online experience for students a better one. Who's doing this? How are they doing it? What's working? What's not working? And so I sought out all these people like yourselves who are very committed to improving the student experience in the online setting. So that's just a little bit about me to give you a bit of history. The background to the fellowship, which I did last year and finished at the end of March this year, you probably know there were 3 equity fellowships offered in 2016 by the National Centre, and mine was very much about developing national guidelines to improve student outcomes in online learning. So what I set about to do was investigate engagement, teaching and support strategies, and I was looking specifically at the domestic undergraduate online cohort, looked at what I wanted to look at what was happening in Australia and also at the Open University UK as a bit of a comparison really. So I conducted qualitative interviews across a range of higher ed institutions, and basically what I was doing was really seeking the combined wisdom of people such as yourself, as practitioners, teaching and support practitioners, on what's most important to help these students stay and succeed. I probably don't need to talk through this slide with you. I think you probably already know this, but online learning does have this very critical and growing place in widening access and participation. It's a great equity measure, really, because students from backgrounds that have been historically underrepresented at university are in fact more strongly represented in online studies, particularly where the lack of entry qualifications are not a major barrier. So open access pathways, mature age entry programs, through coming in through enabling programs, through colleges and so on, such as you have here at the UniSA. To give you some idea of the scope, at the moment we have, I don't have the full year 2016 figures, but the first half of 2016 showed that we have 13.8% of students, commencing students, enrolled in a fully external online mode. And this is how it's been growing. So the top bar is 2010, the bottom bar is the first half of 2016. So it is growing, and it sort of had a fairly rapid growth between 2010 and 2012. And 2015, we've got more, and then the following year, 2016, it's growing more. So it is set to grow, and more universities are developing some very solid online offerings in the undergraduate space. So we know there's easier access because students can overcome the barriers of needing to work, having children, all those sorts of things. They don't have to get to a campus. They can start online studies. It's much easier for them to start online studies, but how much real opportunity are we providing for them? And I guess that's what I was really interested in, because the online student cohort does have a poorer rate of completion compared with the on-campus students. So a particular study that the Australian Government Department of Education ran, which is a cohort study which they continue to look at every year, and it's the cohort that started their studies in 2005, and each year they look at those students, they track them across all different universities they might end up to see how they are going. So we're up to this point, up to 2014 was the last sort of measure of what these students were doing, and we had 46.6% of those who were fully online having completed their degrees over this time period, which is a 9-year time period now. And that compares with a national figure of 76.6% for domestic on-campus students. And more tellingly, I suppose 1 in 5 didn't complete their first year, compared with a 6.9% first year attrition. So I really wanted to look at how we can improve opportunities, how we can widen access, and to help more students persist and succeed. So I had 16 higher education institutions participating in this research, 15 in Australia, and the 16th was the Open University in the UK. 151 members of staff across these universities volunteered to speak with me. All of them were involved in some way in development, coordination, delivery of online education, primarily undergraduate. I did speak to some people who were in foundation programs and a couple of people in postgrad as well, where they have numbers of students coming in to do a postgrad degree as their first experience of being at university because of having recognition for our learning and so on. So they're all involved in online education and in some way in the support, success and retention strategies for online students, whether that be through their teaching practices or other areas of support. So these are the institutions involved. These were the 16 institutions that I spoke with. when I did this presentation recently at the Open University, I had a map of Australia as well to show everybody where they all were, because of course, you know, it's always put, and it is amazing. You look at those maps. I took it out, but perhaps I left it in, because the way we're all around the coast, and there's nothing in that great interior. So it always fascinates me. Even the ones that I think of as being, oh, they're inland, you know, they're really not when you look at the map of Australia. So I did qualitative interviews, and really these are the sorts of questions I was asking. I was interested in finding out the intervention strategies for online students that everyone was using, that people were using, and which did people think might be having a positive impact on access, retention, academic success. Were any of these interventions and strategies being measured, evaluated? In what ways? Did they know of any results? There were some pilots being evaluated, not a lot of evaluation, which I could well understand, because if as an online teacher you find that something really works well in terms of engaging students more, increasing their rate of handing in assessments, generally keeping them more on the ball, then you're not going to run a pilot by doing this with some and not with others. You're just going to keep doing it. So there were some informal measures around, okay, well, this teacher came in and he or she was doing that, and the retention rate jumped. So, you know, there was not a lot of formal evaluation, but there was that kind of intuitive evaluation happening. And also I asked people what else did they think it was important for institutions to do to help online students stay and succeed. So from that, and I hope you might all have a copy or have access to a copy of the executive summary of the report, which looks like this. If you don't, it's online at the National Centre website. But that's the executive summary, so it covers the key findings and the national guidelines. So I'm just going to run through the key findings, and just to let you know, each finding on the subsequent slides is going to be introduced by an online student quote. Now, these online student quotes are not from this latest piece of research, but they're derived from interviews and surveys that in 2 studies that I've been involved in before, and those are the studies that they come from. But I use those quotes because what fascinated me, interested me, I suppose, maybe didn't surprise me, was the congruence between what students were saying they wanted and needed and what those dedicated staff were saying needed to happen. So it was kind of nice to see that what the students were saying they wanted and needed, teachers, support staff, they knew this too, and were really trying to make sure that they met those needs. Okay, so the first key finding, the importance of a strategic whole of institution approach. So the student quote is about this sense that online students have at times of universities not really caring about them, seeing them as somehow second-class students. So universities don't really care about or engage with students, online students, very much. I think a lot of them think that external students are a burden they'd rather not have to cater for. So these are some staff quotes now, where and what they indicate is that there's a very strong view out there that online education needs to be recognised as core business and not as an afterthought. I usually preface this by saying, for those of you working in this area, none of these will be a surprise. You'll just go, yes, yes, of course, we all knew that. And I guess I'm glad about that, because it means that it has actually resonated with the people doing the work. So here's a quote from an online programs coordinator saying, it's not secondary education, and you know, until the whole university thinks like that and it's core business, then we're always pushing things. Also, what came across was the importance of really knowing who these students are, recognising their diversity and their needs, and ensuring that consistency and quality of online delivery and teaching standards. So with that comes teacher training and adequate resourcing. So here's a lecturer saying, I know they're getting a lesser experience than what my on-campus students are getting, and that concerns me greatly. So there's a sense of frustration that was coming across a lot of the time. The second key finding was about that early intervention, intervening early with students to help them connect and also to prepare them. So here's an online student saying, I just felt uni didn't give me that hook to start. You kind of drowned, if that makes sense. We need inductions and orientations just on how to use stuff. So what was coming across was the importance of telling prospective students what to expect. And here's a project coordinator saying, I think we need to be a bit more realistic. It's harder probably doing it online. We need to be setting up realistic expectations. Consider the circumstances of individual prospective students. So here's one example, a student counsellor saying, if they don't work, as in being employed, then it's recommended to them, this is by prospective student advisors when students ring, that they should do full-time study, and I don't think that should be the default. I think there's basically a one-size-fits-all sales approach. So there's often a sense of frustration among people at the coalface working with these students that the university was somehow selling these online courses to students in a way that was not in the students' best interests, and the marketing was at times not realistic and helpful to students. The importance of that early personal contact. So here's a library services manager saying what those students said was that receiving the phone call made them feel a sense of belonging to the university because they'd spoken to someone that they felt knew them. So that outreach, that personal contact, very important. Orientation being designed to suit and engage off-campus students rather than just a sort of adapting on-campus orientation for the online students. They get a chance to engage in a discussion forum, introduce themselves, they get to meet their lecturers that week. So that was an example. Facilitating academic preparation. A course coordinator saying not doing anywhere near enough to get them to a place where they're comfortable with being in an academic environment and so on. And as I'm sure you well understand, these are just examples I've picked out that are representative of many, many, many other quotes. And so for more ideas around that, and all this is in the report, because there are some really good things happening. So I wouldn't want to paint a picture that, no one's doing anything that they should, because that's far from the case. It's more about bringing it all together. So there are some really good examples of online enabling and access programs. There are examples of open access online preparatory courses, and a lot of institutions are doing things like student advisor, student coaching calls. So they're just a few examples, the types of things that are happening. The third key finding is around the vital role of teacher presence. And this, this was something I think that nearly every single person I spoke to talked about. And it didn't surprise me from working at OUA and working with the students and knowing that for the students, having a teacher who was responsive, who was engaged, who they felt was engaged with them, really made all the difference. So here's an online student saying, I'm sort of checking the discussion board to see if anyone's answered what I might have said. I was surprised that I was just in isolation teaching myself. That was a big surprise, the lack of interaction. And I know in research I have done with online students, that phrase teaching myself would come up again and again. So the students need to feel that the teacher is in that virtual room with them. And so it's summed up here by one senior lecturer saying someone on the other end of the system listening to them. Communication and feedback, communication and feedback. You can't communicate enough with online students. So this really is the key to building that sense of belonging to a learning community. A couple of quotes: the tutor of the academic course is the face of the university, the human connection point between the student and the university. And the instructor is everything to the students. So there's just one example of a particular article that talks about ways in which teacher presence is important in engaging diverse student cohorts. There's lots of other examples. The fourth key finding about the content, the curriculum delivery needing to be specifically designed for online and not retrofitted. So what works in person is not the same as online, says this student. I thought it would be more tailor-made than what it is. So what comes across is the importance of designing for online and thinking about distance learning or online learning as a different animal to the face-to-face course. It needs to be designed completely differently. And through that design, then engagement and support through the content and delivery can happen. So just an example here, opportunity for students to engage with content online, teacher presence in the blogs and discussion boards. And that can also strengthen interaction amongst the students. And as one course convener said, discussion is the centerpiece of the classroom experience. And this is a useful guide that's actually just been released. And again, all these are in that in the report and in the executive summary. The fifth finding was about the ongoing contact, the contact and connection along the student journey. And a student saying not having that relationship with people. I know the lecturers are lovely, they're very helpful and all that, but I guess it would be nice for them to more connect with us students. So some universities and some individuals are reaching out to students through a framework of interventions. We reach out to students when we think they may be sort of falling by the wayside, having some difficulties. And the importance of using a range of ways to contact and connect came across. So here's one example of a university who's made distance students our priority in nearly everything we've done. They're a welcome call, student-to-student communication. And I think what's really important is that we all need to know and be confident in the fact that this makes a difference, this sort of outreach contact. So here's just one example of the type of informal measurement and evaluation I was talking about before, of a course coordinator who says, I've been able to get my non-completer range right down. The unit I've just finished, it's down to 4%. It's really low. I've been able to get my fail rate down to 1%, which is really astonishing. And this course coordinator attributes that to the amount of ongoing contact that is being made with students. And the Open University has a framework of interventions that they call the MILS framework, which I can't remember what that stands for, but it is an acronym of something. But it's a whole range of interventions. The University of Newcastle, University of New England has the Early Alert program, but again, there are lots of other examples. And hand in hand with that really goes the role of learning analytics. And here's an online student saying, it's nice to hear another human being's voice, just to let you know how you're going. And you think, wow, how did you know today was the day that I really needed to have someone to check in? So, of course, it is very powerful when we use data from online systems to inform those student interventions. And here's one example of a system, an engagement strategy that involved mapping out behaviours and then contacting those students and using learning analytics in that way. Obviously, learning analytics has the power to personalise interventions and to some extent the curriculum. And this is a learning technology manager saying students expect to be remembered. Analytics and other tools help academics and teachers keep up with that. And just a very simple example is about students expecting to be remembered is I well remember that the number of students at OUA who would get frustrated by the number of emails they would get from universities around car park B is closed on Tuesdays, or the cafeteria over on the west side of the campus is shut. And they would say, don't they know who I am? Don't they know that I'm an online student? They must be able to see that I'm an online student. And of course, it is possible to design systems in ways that they're not getting all these emails that tell them that they are not really part of the university, because that's how they would interpret it. And also it helps to predict who may need that extra help and support by bringing the data together, predictive models built on historical data, predicting risk, using student data to form that predictive model. I really enjoyed speaking to the data scientist people. They're very clever, aren't they, these data people? Some of you might be data people yourselves. I have huge admiration for you if you're here in the room, because the way in which you can use the figures and the numbers to sort of really inform these types of interventions, I think is just so helpful. And then the final finding was about collaboration to deliver support at point of need. So here's an example of a student saying they came back to us and said, you've all got a problem with referencing. You all need to redo your referencing for the next assessment, which was another essay. They gave us no tutorial or anything. And what this requires is academic and support services working together. Ideally, this is what it requires. And this came up time and time again in talking with staff. There were some great examples of that. For instance, this one, a student advisor in every school, a student advisor network functioning across the whole university, so working as much more as a team. Some examples of embedding academic support within the curriculum. The Open University in the UK does this really, really well. So all our level 1 programs, basically the first 2 months, is about learning how to learn. So rather than it's over there, outside of the discipline, it's actually here embedded. And that needs to include technology support, of course. They need assistance in being able to navigate what to do in a unit, where you find information, and so on and so forth. And I put up there the OU example at the Open University in the UK, where there's a nice little paper by Slade and Prinsloo about the way in which the Open University has moved to what they call curriculum-based teams. So there are support and academic staff within the teams based around the curriculum, and everyone I spoke to at the OU was very positive about that change. Before I go on to this sort of to talk about the national guidelines, any questions, comments, thoughts about those key findings? They were the 7 key findings that came from all the data that I had. Do they resonate with you? What any questions, thoughts, comments from those of you not in the room as well?
Hi, Cathy.
Yeah.
Thanks. I just had a question about whether the findings were the same, whether you tracked equity-based students and whether the findings were the same for them as for other students, whether it was consistent across the board or whether you found any particular differences in different cohorts.
I didn't track the student cohorts, is the simple answer to that. I really was just looking at practices and strategies in online learning and what was working in terms of improving student engagement and participation. And I guess working on the theory, which may not be correct, that given the higher numbers of equity students in online learning, if we improve the student experience and the teaching and support experience, then by extension we'll bring those students along with us. But it would be lovely to have someone do a piece of work as a follow-up, you know, in terms of actually looking at tracking those students and whether, yeah, who was being most impacted upon. Thank you. Good question.
Thanks. There's a couple of comments online. Not quite sure if they're questions. Katie, resonating with us at ANU. Hi, people at ANU. Good to see you. They're happy with the advice. Yes, and Peter Balan, what the finding indicate is that engaging online delivery is very intensive and hence expensive. Yes, this was the bottom line. Yes, Elaine is agreeing. And so do we have any questions at this time in the room? Yes, we have one over here. Just bear with me for a moment.
Good morning. Thank you very much for what you're sharing. I think it's very important work. I'm coming from the perspective of mathematics and maths education, particularly I was at the School of Education here. Right. But my background is research into teaching maths online. So one of the issues that has been continuous for me is the notion of disciplinarity and the issue that we don't pay attention to the nature of the disciplines that we're teaching in the online space. It's very much a generic kind of approach. Yeah. So I was wondering if you can comment on that.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And look, it was interesting talking to people working in different disciplines. And I clearly remember an example of someone teaching chemistry and talking about the ways in which this particular lecturer had devised some very specific strategies in the way in which chemistry could be taught online. And I must say, it made me realize how differently you have to do things depending on what you are actually teaching. So I take your point absolutely. And I do think that there's probably a place for more work to be done by people within particular disciplines to say, this is the way in which you teach maths well online, or this is the way in which you teach chemistry well online. And there are some good papers out there too that I've seen, so I think it's a great point.
Thanks, Cathy. Just going back to a question from Katie. She wants advice for applying the guidelines to institutions when only a small percentage of teaching is online.
Well, I'll try to come back to that when I go through the guidelines. Yeah, but
okay.
Yeah, that's
stay online, Katie.
Yeah, yeah, Katie, I feel for you.
Okay, there's another question in the room.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify. So you've looked at online only in this report, and one of the findings is the need to have the curriculum designed for that space.
Yeah.
Now, what about when we have a hybrid? We have some students who dip in and out. Sometimes they're internal on campus, and for work reasons they might pick up an external. So how do we make it consistent in their minds? I've had some feedback, well, it's easier just to turn up to a tutor and than it is to actually do what I'm asking to do online, to be more of this discussion forum. So I just wondered if there's any
Look, I do think that that is challenging, and I think that the hybrid model makes it is different from those who are studying fully externally. So I think if you're talking more about the sort of blended model, I think it is different. Although I did have a number of people say to me in the interviews, if you design primarily for online, then it actually is much easier than to adapt that for face-to-face. So if we're going to be offering online, why don't we just design for online to start with, and then we can adapt it for face-to-face. Now, I'm not a designer, so I can't possibly comment as to whether that's the way to go, but it's certainly a school of thought. So I don't know if that helps at all.
Like everybody else, thank you. This is really fascinating and useful research. You've mentioned in one of the findings the very important role of teacher presence.
Yes.
We know from the literature around connectivism and networked learning and so on that peer-to-peer connections are important.
Yes.
Can you reflect on that in terms of your findings?
Yeah, sure. Certainly, the findings indicated that where there was a strong teacher presence, the connectedness between the students was much stronger as well, and much more positive. That if a teacher, a very engaging teacher, someone who was with those students, you know, on a very consistent basis, could then introduce exercises and collaborative processes within the online classroom that would get students working together as well. So part of the engagement strategies tended to be also those collaborative peer-to-peer exercises. So one led to the other really, whereas, and certainly anecdotally and in research I've done with online students, those who have a teacher who's not engaged, the ones who talk about, you know, I'm teaching myself, either had no contact with the other students, or sometimes if they had set up their own Facebook group, as you know happens much of the time, there'd be a lot of bitching in the Facebook group about the bad teaching they were getting, whereas and as I said, this is largely anecdotal, but there were examples of where they felt they were getting really good teaching, then the discussions they would have in the Facebook group would be much more productive and much more about their learning and the content, rather than just spending all their time saying, where are you now, bloody teacher, you know, so, yeah.
Thanks, Cathy. Another question online from Elaine. How does this compare, say, with some of the VET fully online courses where in New Zealand, for example, they took the competencies/outcomes and represented within an overarching framework/theory?
I can't comment on that because I haven't really looked at the VET framework. I'm sorry. Yeah. No
worries. Thanks. Elaine's typing something, but that'll come through. So is there any more questions in the room? Okay, we have it. Hang on.
Thanks. Okay. Sorry. Thanks for your good introduction and every explanation. It's very nice. I just wanted to ask you, when you talked about the dropout rate compared to that online and on-campus students, did you look at their study load? Sometime I found some students, basically they are working full time because they are doing online and they are actually taking on full load as well, thinking they are superstars. Exactly. But then when it comes to the crunch time of submitting assignments, they are dropping out.
Yeah.
So do we have to, I think I always tell them the load of you have to balance work and life and all the things. Yes. But I don't have time to always
look, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that came across in that I put in one of the findings around students need to have good advice and be given clear, the expectations need to be realistic, so that we shouldn't be advising students to take a full-time study load when they've got other responsibilities, that they need to be able to adjust that load to fit in with their other responsibilities, and that needs to be really clear. So you're absolutely right, and this applies a lot to online students because there's a very high rate of part-time among online, as we know, and it is because people do have other responsibilities in their lives. But also, you're absolutely right in that on campus there's a higher rate of attrition among part-time students too. So part of the online attrition can be attributed to the part-time attrition, but I think not all of it. Yeah, but it's a big issue.
Okay, thanks. I think we need to get
move
going
on
again.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll just move on to the conclusion. Really is wrapped in with the national guidelines. So what I've done is I've developed 10 guidelines for institutions based on these findings. So the first one is about knowing who the students are, making sure that this external online cohort is well understood across the institution. And in the executive summary, I go into these guidelines in a lot more detail in terms of how to do that, how that translates into action, and so on. The second guideline is about developing, implementing, and regularly reviewing institution-wide quality standards for online education, and that continuous quality improvement. So it's not just an add-on, oh, you're teaching this, okay, you can pick up this online unit as well. There needs to be definitely quality control around that. The importance of intervening early to address student expectations, build skills and engagement, contact, connect, and prepare. The fourth guideline is about explicitly valuing and supporting this vital role of teacher presence through training, resourcing, realistic class sizes, and allocated teaching time. And there were examples that I came across of casual, sessional, online staff having being asked to pick up an online unit that might have had 300 students in it and given very little time to do it, and explicitly being told, don't spend too much time on this because I know you've got all this other work. Meant kindly to the tutor, but not very kind, really. Design for online, online first, inclusive and accessible. Engage and support through curriculum, content and delivery, and that relies on institutional quality standards. Build collaboration across the campus to deliver holistic student support that's integrated and embedded in the curriculum. Contact and communicate with students throughout the student journey through an institutional framework of interventions. So it doesn't just rely on the individual teacher knowing that it helps their students if they contact them from time to time. They need to be supported by an institutional framework. And making strategic use of learning analytics to inform that intervention strategy, to target and personalise student interventions, including personalising the curriculum. And finally, but certainly most importantly, institutions need to invest appropriately in online education to ensure both access and opportunity. It needs to be seen as core business. If it's going to be offered, it needs to be seen as core business, funded appropriately. So just to bring that all together, the way it would look in an ideal world if institutions adopt these guidelines is there'd be an institution-wide online learning strategy championed at senior levels, core business. Demographic information about online student cohorts would be made available to involved staff, would be easily accessible and understandable, so that staff have a bit of a baseline when they start teaching a course online to know at least how many, you know, men and women they've got in the group, how many people who have what the age range is and so on, to give them a bit of an idea, perhaps who's enrolled full-time, who's enrolled part-time, so that you can begin to plan a little bit. And of course, appropriate resourcing for realistic online class sizes and teaching hours, funding for support and retention programs, and ongoing funding, because there's a lot of reliance on HEP funding, which is of course short-term, and some programs which are running well and improving retention don't know if they're going to be running next year because the HEP funding hasn't come through yet. Technology improvements, learning platforms design, tools and data analytics, resourcing for all of that. And then there'd be online teaching and learning design standards that ensure engagement, inclusion and accessibility for all students, and that would include staff development and training. There'd be early intervention, there'd be orientation that's appropriate for online, academic preparation for new and prospective students, and that would include face-to-face options, both on campus and off campus. Some universities are doing a lot of outreach face-to-face, going out to various areas where online students are, bringing them into campus for those who can come in. And there'd be a teamwork approach to student support, academics and professional staff collaborating to embed support in the curriculum, academic skills and tech support being part of that. And there'd be an online student intervention strategy with targeted and personalised messages based on information from learning analytics, including predictive modelling and personalised curriculum. So that's sort of a very kind of brief example of how it could be brought together. As I say, there's a lot more detail in the actual report itself. So thank you for listening. Further discussion and questions would be most welcome. Oh, I should go back to, was it Katie's question about, you know, if there's not much, if it's very small, then how do you, you know, get these guidelines implemented? Yes. Look, I think that makes it difficult, but I think the point needs to be made that if an institution is going to offer online, then they need to offer it well, no matter how small it is. And I think that it's important that the staff involved in it advocate for that and, you know, wave these guidelines under the noses of whoever they can wave them under and say, look, you know, if we're doing it at all, we need to do it well. Otherwise, these students are going to feel like second-class citizens and they're not going to stay. And from a business point of view too, I think that, you know, in terms of the bottom budget line, which is always a concern, if you're enrolling students, if you're marketing, enrolling, you're spending a lot of money on that. If they're just dropping out, then that's completely wasted money. Whereas putting a bit of extra money in now to try to cover off on these sorts of guidelines is going to make a difference to retention. And I'll come back to the point I made earlier that we need to believe in this and to know that it makes a difference, because it's not just my report that's out there. There's actually a lot of other evidence out there to show that these kinds of things do make a very clear difference to retention and progression of students, which is a financial imperative for universities. So, Katie, I'd suggest you try all that.
Thanks very much, Cathy. I'd just like to say I'll send out a recording of this session to everybody who registered, and along with the recording, I'll send the PDF of the report, so it should be available to everybody. Okay, there's a couple of quick questions online, and if anyone has a question you want to put your hand up in a moment. There's one from Wendy Abigail. What is a realistic class size?
Look, I think this comes back to what, sorry, I don't know your name, Sven, what Sven was saying about different disciplines. I think that varies, and I couldn't possibly, I couldn't possibly say, well, it's got to be this number or that number, because I think that the people who are doing the actual teaching and the course delivery, they're the experts on this. So it is going to vary, I think, from across different disciplines. But I think that what the idea of these guidelines, and within the report, I make this quite specific, that in order to set realistic class sizes, institutions need to consult with the experts, with the people who are designing and teaching these courses, to say, okay, what's going to work with this group? And there'll be a bit of experimentation, but some people will say, well, I've managed to teach this many, whatever. I know at the Open University UK, they have a class size of 40, just to give you, that's their benchmark. It's a class size of 40, but I think it does vary across disciplines.
Thank you. There's another question from Katie. Excuse me. Can you tell us about how different institutions pay casual teachers for online teaching? Is it hourly per student?
It tended to be hourly, the institutions I spoke to, but I didn't actually go into the details. But it was more about what they told me. But I spoke to quite a number of sessional staff, and it seemed clear to me that they were talking about being paid hourly rather than per student.
Okay. Wendy asks, how many hours per week is the average allocated to the tutor to teach online?
That varies a great deal, so yeah.
Okay, just scanning for some more questions. Everyone's very happy with the session.
That's nice, thank you.
Does anyone have a question?
Katrina here. I guess
what is ideal in terms of engaging students in a continuous way? Like in terms of what you're saying, teacher presence is vital. And like a benchmark, I guess, what do successful programs advocate for the hourly, because, I'm from Flinders and I'm trying to think about the online offerings that we'll be developing. We need a benchmark. We need something to argue our case for.
But look, there are some more specific examples within the report in terms of the full report in terms of quotes from staff about the types of things that they do in their classes that make a difference. That might be helpful to you. But I think that it's worthwhile when you're developing online courses to talk to other people at other institutions that are running similar courses and talk to them and get their ideas about that too. I wasn't really looking at, okay, what is the best way to run an online course, because I do think that varies across the type of course and the discipline. It's more about making sure that within a unit or a course that you're teaching, there are opportunities for students to collaborate, that the student knows who their teacher are and knows that their teacher will respond. And it doesn't have to be every day, but if they know that their teacher has given very clear guidelines about, I will respond to your emails within this amount of time. Look, it just varied such a lot in terms of what people were doing. But the important factors seem to be, and I know that from the research with students too, that they just need to know when they can expect to hear from their tutor, and it needs to be not too far away. And they need to have opportunities to engage in activities with that are going to be varied, the content's going to be varied, they need to have opportunities to interact with other students. So there are lots of really, and in the reference list in the report, you'll find examples of papers written by people who are teaching courses, which do give very good, clear examples of what they do and how they do it. So I think, yeah, follow up on some of those maybe. Yeah.
Thanks, Cathy. I'm Paul from Nursing at the University of Adelaide. We run a lot of online courses, and I see a distinction between asynchronous and synchronous delivery.
Yes.
When I went looking for some guidelines in terms of synchronous delivery, I just really struggled to find any sort of information. And to me, I think there's to improve the student experience, there's quite a variation in terms of the way you design, deliver, plan, course and content delivery as well. So, and when I talk to senior people in university, they see e-learning as one thing, and it's not 2,700.
Yeah. No, you're right. I think that there is a need for both synchronous and asynchronous activities, and they need to be and there shouldn't be one instead of the other, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say, because many students will not attend the synchronous activities for all sorts of reasons, just availability, accessibility, all kinds of things, and maybe social anxiety, who knows. But a lot of students will not attend the synchronous activities, while other students will love them. And that's why it's really important to have the asynchronous activities as well, that cover the same material in a different way that the synchronous. So it's important not to rely on just one method of delivery. I think that's what I learned from talking to so many people, that there needs to be these multiple ways of delivering the information. And yes, I do think that often senior people in the institution may not understand the amount of time this takes, but it takes a lot of time, a lot of teaching time to do it well.
Following on, I guess, from the last few questions, our core business, when you look at sort of, we're employed to work, 9 to 5 type thing, and our students, I know my students will always email me out of hours.
Yes,
So as part of your conversations with the students, were they speaking about their preferred study time and I guess perhaps the lack of teacher presence when they are electing to study and the impact that's having? And so do we really need to rethink how we're getting online and delivering these courses?
I do think that's part of it. I think, though, that I don't think mostly students are not looking for immediate response in a synchronous way or almost synchronous way. If they're working on something late at night and they put a comment on the discussion board that they want help with something, I don't think many of them expect to get an answer straight away, but they would like one the next day. Yeah. But I do think that institutions need to rethink the times in which services are available, and that applies to support services too. That where you've got a 9 to 5 model, and not all that is in the report in more detail. When you've got a 9 to 5 model, that is not appropriate for most of the online students who are working out of hours. So I do think that there needs to be a shift there to think about working different hours.
Okay, so the students really didn't make a point of as part of those focus.
No, in the work I've done with students, no, they haven't. It's more about support services actually being available out of hours. I think most of them are quite forgiving of, or maybe that's not the right word, but very understanding of the fact that their teacher's not going to be replying to them at 11 o'clock at night. Yep. They don't expect that. But as I say, if they don't hear something the next day, they get edgy. If they don't hear something the next day after that, then they start to get really toey because they don't know what to do.
Thank you.
Okay, we have time. Sorry, we have time for one last question, and we have to leave for the students in the 9 o'clock class coming. So thanks for
this is more of a comment. I've been fortunate enough to study at a number of universities online.
Yep.
The ones that I've found that are the best from a student perspective are the ones where the course coordinators and the tutors are actively engaged in the student in the learning online. The best ones have been Charleston and Curtin University. They focus on them. And they also use a range of different methods. So at Curtin, I'm sorry if he's listening, but Dr. Tamaleva, he actually he does actively participate in Facebook groups with his students. So not just relying on the LMS system to communicate. I just wanted to give that feedback from a student perspective.
Thank you, and that fits in beautifully.
And also I'm tech support here at UniSA.
Oh, great.
I think also it's really important for course coordinators to actually speak to the tech support because we're the first point of call for students. We can give you a lot of feedback on what they ask about.
And that's what I was meaning with the collaborative approach. And in the report, you'll see there's a lot more detail around the way support and technical IT support and other support services need to be working in a teamwork way with academics around this. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much. And that's all we have for today. But before we go, I've just got a notice about some more of Cathy's presentation.
Thanks, Cathy. That was a fabulous session. I really appreciated that. If anybody would like to have a little bit more time with Cathy, she is actually doing another seminar with the Hertz Group tomorrow. It's being held in HH 309, which is the Hansheisen Lecture Theatre, and so it's from 9:30 till 12. So she's going to be talking further about this sort of detail with a bit more of an interactivity. So if you want to re-pick her brains again, you're very, very welcome to join us at that time as well. There's an online registration point for that as well. So thank you, Cathy. It was a fabulous session, really informative.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, everybody, and thanks everybody online for making the effort to come online, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.